I'm Congressman Joe Crowley, representing the 14th Congressional District in Queens and Bronx, New York, and the chair of the Democratic Caucus. I'm joined this morning by two of my great colleagues. First, the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez, and the gentleman to my right, Seth Moulton, from the great state of Massachusetts. They'll all be addressing you this morning. We were told during the campaign not to take President Trump seriously or literally. But he's following through on most of the extreme campaign promises that he made. Quite frankly, we have to take him seriously and literally at everything he's doing. We know that President Trump and his cronies in the White House, Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, want to force their extreme views on the American people. But what is really more chilling is that more than 80 congressional Republican members have come out in support of the Muslim ban, and we're calling it what it is, a Muslim ban. That dwarfs the number of GOP lawmakers in both the House and the Senate who have had the courage to stand up for American values and come out against President Trump's ban. There are only 24 who have done so, and quite frankly, that's not enough. The vast majority of our Republican colleagues have stayed silent. They've ran away, and that's shameful. Let's be clear. I've said this before. Immigrants are the best, the brightest, and the bravest coming to our nation. They are brave. President Trump is a coward. President Trump and Steve Bannon and his cronies are cowards. And anyone who doesn't stand up against this ban joins the ranks of cowards. You'll hear from my colleague Seth Moulton on how this executive order creates a grave security issue for diplomats and for service members. But the issue is just not a Muslim ban. Trump has issued a series of executive orders. We also have Congressman Kiheun we hope to have join us, and if not, I'll speak to the issue of American safety, how we must continue to have a haven for people looking to come here to make a better way of life for themselves. I was in New York over the weekend and attended a rally at Battery Park, as well as was at JFK Airport. I spoke to the Customs and Border folks about individuals who were detained at JFK. The stories were shameful. Individuals were handcuffed during that time period. There was a 5-year-old child detained at Dulles Airport. A journalist in Chicago. In New York, students and refugees were detained, along with an Iraqi immigrant who had risked his life in the cause of helping American soldiers and American interest in Iraq. That is shameful for that individual to have been detained at JFK for a moment, let alone a day and a half. So with that, let me recognize the gentlelady from California and the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Linda Sanchez.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Joe. Well, as you might imagine, for Donald Trump, the honeymoon did not last long. Donald Trump has essentially stepped into office and shredded the Constitution. And I searched mightily to try to characterize what the first 10 days of his presidency have been like, and the only words that come to mind are dumpster fire. The whole world saw a second weekend of protests all across the United States, with millions of Americans taking to the streets because they are concerned and angry with the direction in which he's taking our country. From a 2,000-mile border wall to his reckless Muslim ban that was not properly vetted by the Department of State, Defense, or Justice, the president's actions have sparked global outrage and concern. That's why yesterday House Democrats fought back. Led by Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California, we introduced legislation to overturn the president's unconstitutional Muslim ban. Now we are looking for courageous Republicans to stand up and speak out against these hateful anti-refugee, anti-immigrant executive orders. I implore my Republican colleagues to join with Democrats and stop these dangerous and dictatorial missives that Donald Trump keeps signing. Now is not the time for us to stay silent and hope for the best. If we fail to change course. History is not going to be kind to those who stood by and did nothing and allowed this to go on. The world is watching us and waiting for us to act. Democrats are ready to push back against unconstitutional executive orders, and courageous people like Sally Yates are standing up to this governance by bullying. So I urge my Republican colleagues to stand with us and push back against power grab by a man who doesn't really have an understanding of how our immigration laws work or our government agencies work. And with that, I will turn back over to Joe Crowley.
It's remarkable how Back to the Future has really come to fruition. The Cubs won the World Series, and Biff did become president. We know he's a bully, and most bullies are cowards. And to shed more light on how these executive orders make us less secure, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Seth Moulton.
I just want to be very clear that Donald Trump's executive orders, his Muslim ban, absolutely make our country less safe. They make our troops less safe overseas, and they make us less safe at home. And there are two fundamental reasons why. The first is that our terrorist enemies will use this propaganda to further their idea that America is at war with the Muslim faith. And ISIS has already used the executive order as propaganda to recruit more terrorists, and organizations across the world, terrorist organizations, will use it to incite attacks against Americans, both at home and abroad. The second reason why this is so dangerous is that it makes it much more difficult for us to work with our critical Muslim allies overseas. Those translators, those intelligence sources that are absolutely essential to our fight against terrorism. The people that I had to work with on the ground, that I trusted with my life. And in turn, they trusted me with their lives. And now we're abandoning them. You have to be smart and tough in the fight against terror. When I served in the 1st Marine Division, our division motto was, no better friend, no worse enemy, the United States Marines. That's about being smart and tough. Everybody knows what the second part means. You don't want to be the enemy of the United States Marines. But the part that comes first is that if you are willing to put your life on the line, not just for your country, but for ours, we will be your best friend. We will protect you from the terrorists who are our common enemies. Well, Donald Trump's national security policy and his executive order are dumb and weak. Dumb because it alienates the very allies that we need in the fight against terror, and weak because it shows that he is putting partisan politics ahead of our national security. With that, I'll turn it back to Joe Crowley.
We're hoping to have Congressman Kihuen here to talk about the executive order dealing with sanctuary cities. Seth Moulton just mentioned the fact that the executive order dealing with the ban on Muslims in these 7 countries sends a message to our allies that we're not your partners. The same thing happened. Okay, Ruben, thank you. The same thing happened with the issuance of the executive order on sanctuary cities, and here to talk about that is Congressman Ruben Kiheun.
Just in the nick of time.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning to everyone. My name is Ruben Kiheun. I represent the 4th Congressional District of Nevada. This basically covers North Las Vegas and one of the most diverse areas in the state of Nevada. And I am the proud son of a housekeeper and a former farm worker. My family came to the United States when I was 8 years old in pursuit of the American dream. I was once undocumented in this country. My family came here with a visa. We overstayed our visa, like many other immigrant families who come here to this country. And eventually, thanks to a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, I was able to become a citizen. And today, I'm a sitting member of Congress. You know, and so it goes to show you that this country is great, that this country is willing to give an opportunity to an immigrant family that is willing to work hard for it. But what we're seeing right now by President Trump is a hateful, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-refugee, anti-women, anti-gay and lesbian agenda. And I'd be more than happy to sit down and talk about a compromise immigration reform bill that can help solve the entire problem of immigration in the country. We know part of the reason why people are coming here illegally and crossing the border is because we have a broken immigration system. So my family is the embodiment of the American dream. We are the perfect example of what can happen when you give a family an opportunity to succeed here in America. And so today we're here to speak up, to speak out, that we are not going to roll over. There are certain things where we can compromise on. If President Trump wants to talk about job creation, about coming up with a solution to immigration reform, about the Affordable Care Act, I'd be more than happy to sit down with them. But there's also things that we just don't compromise on. We don't compromise on our values and our beliefs. And when you're talking about deporting 11 million people, when you're talking about building a wall that can cost up to $20 billion, and by the way, those $20 billion can put people back to work. We can invest it in our infrastructure and create jobs. A lot of people in the 4th Congressional District today are still without jobs. And so again, I'd be more than happy to sit down, but there's just certain things that we just don't compromise on. These DACA students, these refugees, these immigrants, they deserve an opportunity to succeed here in America. And what we're seeing right now is illegal, unconstitutional, and un-American actions by the president. These are some of the most un-American actions that I've ever seen by an American president. And so we're here to say we're not going to take it, and we're going to push back, and we're going to defend the rights of our constituents of all backgrounds. Thank you, everybody.
Let me just go a little bit deeper in terms of the issue of sanctuary cities and what impact this will have. And my city of New York, I was proud to stand last week with Commissioner O'Neill of the NYPD. And he talked, and I also talked about what message this sends to the immigrant communities in a city that loves immigrants like we do in New York City. It's part of the fabric and the foundation of what New York City is today. It says to that immigrant population, don't cooperate with the police department. Don't cooperate with them, because if you do, you could be subject to deportation. That does not make New York any safer. We know that New York City, because in fear that the NYPD would lose federal funding if we don't unwind the sanctuary city provisions in New York. As someone who experienced 9/11, lost a first cousin on 9/11, I harbor no love in any way, shape, or form for anyone who wishes us ill will. I recognize, though, we need to have open communication with all people in New York City so that the criminal element within the undocumented population could also be recognized and they be dealt with and deported from the United States. So when you look at the fact that the president would have to cut OWASI, the Urban Area Security Initiative, which I helped to put together with then Rep. Vito Fossella about 15 years ago after 9/11. Those are specifically funds to cities like New York at high risk of a terrorist attack. New York, I think, gets the largest amount, number one, because we're the site of the 9/11 attack, but also we still are subject to potential terrorist threat. And I would just suggest that a building on 5th Avenue around 56th Street called Trump Tower that 3 or 4 months ago was not a security risk, today is. The notion or idea that he would threaten to reduce federal funding in New York City because of its sanctuary city status would actually diminish the ability of the NYPD to do their job and keep New Yorkers safe, including protecting Trump Tower. So with that, we'll be happy to take some questions.
Mr. Crowell, thank you. Obviously, you guys disagree with the policy, but what do you think led to the policy? We've read things about Bannon, we've read things about Miller, and do you think, though, that what is really here, when they perceive this, regardless of if they handled this in a ham-fisted matter, didn't vet it properly, or say, okay, there's some reasons why we think we ought to do this, but when you know the background there, do you think that this is really a veiled effort or a not-so-veiled effort? People of color, people from other countries, regardless of whether or not they should have legal status here in any capacity.
I have my own views on this. I think just dismissing this as ineptitude is a mistake. I think this has been well planned out for some time. I don't think that Donald Trump has the bandwidth to do this himself. That's why I made reference, if you didn't catch it, to President Bannon, because it's unprecedented, the access that he now has. Make reference to the fact that George W. Bush would not let Karl Rove be on the NSA, but instead we see Karl Rove 15-fold more in terms of Bannon having that position and diminishing the other intelligence officers within the White House as a price to pay to have him on there, I think is unprecedented, and it's scary, to say the least. I think as well that this is a test to how far they can go. They're like they're testing the waters out there to see what response they get or don't get from our Republican members of Congress, just how far a leash they'll let them have. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, over 80 members of the House Republican Conference have signed on to what Donald Trump, including Speaker Ryan, who during the campaign said he was against the Muslim ban. And he has come out in favor of what Donald Trump is doing. You talk about talking out both sides of your mouth. I guess when the unexpected happens, like when Donald Trump gets elected president, I guess what you said before doesn't count anymore. It's a whole new world. Do my colleagues have anything want to add to that?
After Trump was first elected, there seemed to be two schools of thought with House Democrats. One was, this guy is not a traditional Republican, maybe we can work with him on some stuff. The other was, this guy, we need to resist him at every turn that we can. And just talking to rank and file members, it seems that people are shifting more towards resistance. Have you seen that, and do you think that there are still any hopes that you can work with him on certain policy areas?
Well, again, who's really running the show? You know, as I said before, 4 years ago, Donald Trump was a pro-choice liberal. Does anyone disagree with that? And today, if you look at it on its face, he's a right-wing nationalist radical by what he's doing. So, as I said, I don't think he has the bandwidth to do what he's doing. This is a coordinated effort behind the scenes by Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and others to do this, quite frankly.
Do you think there's an opportunity for you guys to work with him, or are you shifting towards, let's fight this guy at every chance we can?
Well, I think it remains to be seen just what happens after Hell Week and how long this will continue. It's unprecedented in my 30 years of elective office in both the state and federal level. I've never seen a president act like this, or an administration act like this. To unsettle the American population in the way in which they have, understanding that some actually agree with the policies he's taken, and they're excited about what he's doing, so-called following through on his campaign promises. But clearly, there is incredible unrest and the unnerving of many within America, and I would suggest even in his own party, as reflected by Senators McCain and Graham and others, and 24 Republicans in the House and the Senate, who disagree with the ban on Muslims. The anxiety level is incredibly high in this country, unnecessarily, and changing the values of the American way. A week and a half ago, we were a different country in many respects. And that's not what the American people voted for.
Could I add to that? I would just add that given that as a candidate, Trump was all over the place with what his positions were, coming into a new administration, we didn't know what to expect. And I think we have learned a very valuable lesson over the last 10 days, even those of us who had hopes that we could find some common ground, because I will tell you, Democrats are invested in the success of this country above all else. So if there are positive, good policies that President Trump would like to work on us with, I think there isn't a Democrat who would say no. But we are learning not to take him at his word. We are learning to watch his actions and to see what his true policies will be. And what we see, we cannot sign on to. I mean, signing executive orders without clearing them through the Department of Defense or Justice or State to see if they're constitutional tells us he's not interested in sitting down and working cooperatively with the agencies that exist. It's almost like it doesn't matter if these agencies exist or not. And so we're watching his actions and thinking to ourselves, there's very little chance, I think, at this point, that there is anything positive and productive that he is sincere about wanting to work with Democrats on. So we are very wary. Again, Joe said, very unsettled. We are watching in horror as we see a man who walks in and has no understanding of how government runs and wants to govern by missive. And that's not the way our government works. Our government has a legislative branch for a reason. We have independent agencies for a reason. And yet he seems to be ignoring that and just full throttle ahead.
How much do executive orders like this re-emphasize the need for Article I powers, which have been pretty much diminished for the past decade or so?
Well, I think many of us are looking for who that individual or individuals will be that will stand up for the Congress right now in our role, in the separation of powers. Many of us are suspect as to whether or not this administration, after the executive order was signed and it was stay put on its place by a federal judge in New York, whether or not that was fully complied with, and whether or not there was a disregard for that stay. Only time will tell. I think the experiences were different at airports around the country, and so we know that individuals who had the right or the visa, green card to come to this country were denied and were held in their port of entry. These are issues that need to be delved into. So I think I'm looking for a champion. I'm hoping that one of my colleagues on the other side in the House steps up and says enough. I think the American people will appreciate that in the long run. I think history will look kindly on that individual or those individuals who stand up to this bully. Anyone else?
Go ahead.
I'll just add briefly that conservative thought leader Bill Kristol tweeted this weekend that today Democrat Seth Moulton stands for my values, not Senator Mitch McConnell. Now, Bill Kristol and I disagree on a lot of issues, but I know Bill Kristol believes in the Constitution, and that's why he said that. We both believe in the Constitution. It's very clear that this administration, led by the most unpopular new president in American history, does not believe in the Constitution. So when you see Democrats responding over the past few days, and you see millions of people taking to the streets to protest Donald Trump, they're not protesting just because he was elected. They're protesting him because of things he is doing.
Yeah, I just want to add, going back to one of the questions, I just got off a very competitive race where I've actually been on the ground for the last 2 years, listening to people all throughout Nevada. And if you look at my district, it includes urban and rural Nevada, Republicans and Democrats. And one thing is for sure, people want to see solutions to the problems right now that we're faced with in this country. They're hoping that both Republicans and Democrats can come together and put them back to work and make sure that those folks who now have health care keep their health insurance. And so for me to see this type of rhetoric and these actions by President Trump and with the Republicans not having the courage to stand up to him and say this is immoral, this is illegal, this is unconstitutional, it's very disappointing because that is part of the reason why Congress has an 8% approval rating. That is why people are frustrated with the system. That is why people are frustrated with their elected officials. What we need to do is we got to put our parties aside. We got to come together. But it all begins with the leadership. The responsibility of a president is to unite the country, not to divide the country. And what we're seeing right now is President Trump is dividing this country. That's why you're seeing protests in every single airport. We had almost 500 people at the Las Vegas airport. People want solutions to the problems that they're faced with today. We're here to try to come with the solutions. And again, I'd be more than happy to sit down with Republicans, with the president, if they were to have reasonable solutions to the problems that we're faced with. But all we're seeing right now is just this hateful, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-women, anti-gay and lesbian, anti-worker, anti-American pieces of legislation. And that's very disappointing.
Let me just follow up as well. I was here during the Bush years. I think, Linda, you were as well. I never would have stood up here and said what I'm saying about then President Bush. I didn't agree with him on a lot of things. I can tell you something. I liked him as an individual. I got along with him fairly well. And it hurts me to speak in the way in which I am about this president, and we're only in week 2. This will be a long 4 years, but I got to tell you something. Unless I see radical change, I'm going to continue to speak out against what he's doing.
Last question.
Several of you have mentioned, kind of raised constitutional questions about what President Trump's approach has amounted to. Tonight we're going to get a Supreme Court nominee. How is the nature of the court going to handle this? They're going to have a heavier task load, I would guess you would assert. But suppose they pick somebody like a Mr. Scalia, who could be intimidating and bellicose as he presents his opinions.
Well, this is obviously an issue that the Senate is going to have to deal with, and our Democratic colleagues. We just asked before about, when can you start to get along, or so to speak, or is there an opportunity that maybe we'll have a better opportunity to work with the president? I don't think anytime soon, certainly not today. If there's any indication by the rumors of whom we hear may potentially be offered this evening as a Supreme Court nominee. Not knowing who that's going to be, I can't comment on them. But I suspect, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be right about this. I bet the House that it will be a Scalia-esque type of individual. I suspect there's not much of an appetite on the Democratic side of the aisle to supply the votes for the 60 votes to do that. So I think President Trump should discuss this with his sister a little bit more and have a person of balance and approach that will not be a Scalia-esque. Do we have time for one more? Or?
We have
We have to go. So I have to go. So thank you all.
Thank you.